Greetings, everyone. I am so thrilled to be back in conversation with my friend Barbara Hand Clow. And we're going to be talking about the earth changes that we're experiencing right now, 3I-Atlas, a whole range of topics, and some of the latest findings from Egypt. So we're going to be covering a lot of territory, but I'm so glad to be back in conversation with you, Barbara. And for those who don't know you, you're an extraordinary, brilliant, internationally known astrologer, author, particularly author of the Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, Activating the Full Spectrum of Consciousness, your revision of that amazing book. You also are a ceremonial teacher and a Mayan calendar researcher, and just such a wise voice in this time, guiding us in how to be in this time of transition and open to higher dimensional ways of being. So thank you for
Well,
being here.
thank you, Heather. And what's been fun about connecting with you, which is now, I guess this is the fifth, maybe fourth or fifth time we've talked or whatever. But what's fun about connecting with you is watching all the other stuff you're doing. Because, for example, I opened up my computer this morning and there was the interview with Pia Orleone and her husband. His name is, can't remember.
Cullen, Jared Smith.
That's right. That's right. And I put, helped her get published and everything and knew her for many years. And she's a wonderful person. But there you were, got a chance to talk to them.
It's fun.
And
It's
yeah,
great just connecting with so many teachers
yeah,
and wise voices in this time.
yeah, yeah. And he's a great channel and she's a great channel. It's just wonderful. And as I said to you with our pre-chat, people are really gathering together. And probably everybody who watches this video is having the same experience in their own way, in their own group of people that they're involved with, because we're coming back together into oneness now. And that just feels so good. I mean, that's got to be the best thing that's happening right now.
I'm so glad you said that, Barbara, because people feel so bombarded by the
Mhm,
turmoil in the world and all of the information that they're getting through social media and the mainstream media, which is so fear-based to a great
mhm,
extent. And yet, on this planet, there is so much awakening happening, and
yeah.
so many people who are moving into creative collaboration and new ways of being into the paradigms of the Aquarian age. So it's
It's really people are getting really excited about many things. And we're in the middle of an evolutionary upgrade for sure. We know that for sure. And excitement is what enables you to do that. If you just keep pursuing the things that really excite your passion, you just can't stop exploring. And then you start just activating yourself to more developed and higher dimensional levels.
beautiful. Well, before we get into our other conversation, you said you have some news about Egypt. And since I'm leaving for Egypt in about 10 days, I would love to hear what you've discovered.
Well, this is the fantastic story. It's a personal story as well as a general story, which is why I'm willing to tell it freely. Um, and it's a wonderful story because it ties together all the things that are happening with the longer timeline. Like right now, I'm working with 100,000 years, and regarding Egypt, I'm working with the issue of ancient technology under the Giza Plateau, as well as under Buseji Mountains in Romania and the Montana megaliths. And, we're experiencing just this incredible awakening now of the ancient timelines because of the SARS technology and the various forms of ground penetrating radar. At this point, with the Giza Plateau, because of the Italian group of scientists who made announcements in March after their conference, we at this point can see what's a mile under the Great Pyramid. And that's a miracle. And so back to the personal part of this. I was working doing acquisitions at Barron Company back in the late 1980s, and an engineer from Chicago named Chris Dunn came into my office with the manuscript. And the basic gist of the manuscript was that this engineer, and by the way, he's a very high-level professional engineer in Chicago, is still working. And Chris studied the Great Pyramid for 10 or 15, 20 years, and then came to the conclusion that it was a power plant. And so the book called The Giza Power Plant was Chris's book about the Great Pyramid as a power plant. Well, where it gets funny and where it gets personal is I was in a position at Bear, if I really wanted to, I was in a position to just say, okay, we're going to publish this no matter what. In most cases, we did have consensus agreement, but I just said, I'm not going to work here unless if I really know for sure that a book is good, I'm going to publish it, and that's that. Well, what happened at Bear and Company was I became the laughing stock because everybody, even including my husband Jerry, although he was better than everybody else, they just thought this was hysterical that the company was going to take on this crazy book trying to prove that that the Great Pyramid was a power plant by this engineer. Okay, so Chris and I became friends as a result of it, because you can imagine what happened in his life as a Chicago engineer. So we had a lot of fun in laughing at all the ridicule. So the book came out, and the basic public response was, "Oh my God, we thought people were crazy up until this point, but now they're even crazier, right?" And so then the book started selling because somehow people just sensed something. And there are some people out there who will buy every book on the pyramids just because it's about the pyramids. So over the years, this is 35 years ago or something like that. Over the years, a series of very, very honored scientists studied the book and and examined their part of it because there's so many different levels in this book. And a whole bunch of scientists verified various aspects of Chris Dunn's book. And so as of maybe 10 years ago or something like that, he was then respected and honored for what he had done. And he wrote another book after that that came out last year. And then the next thing that happened was I'm trying to remember how I got this. Somebody, oh, I know, I have a couple of finders out there who pick up information for me and send it to me when they know it's important. So one of my finders, Robert Dunkel, who's a wonderful garlic farmer in upstate New York, and I call him Dunk. Dunk sent me an 8-minute video by a scientist talking about the Great Pyramid and Chris Dunn and the group of Italian scientists. And I hadn't heard anything about this from Chris because I hadn't communicated with him in the last year. But what happened was Chris started getting really curious about this discovery under the pyramid in March and of 2025. And so Chris got in touch with the scientists in Italy. They got to know each other and all that. And then finally, the scientists in Italy said, we're having a conference in late September, and you got to come to this conference and you've got to speak about the relationship of your book on the power plant and then the findings that we have found under the Great Pyramid, which have now been verified, by the way. Even though there's total denial in the mass media as usual, the facts are structures have been discovered under the Giza Plateau that are, in my opinion, 50 to 100,000 years old, and they are technological. And this is just happening. It's really, this year has been remarkable. So Chris gave a lecture at the conference in Italy where what he did was he said, okay, these scientists, the group of scientists in Italy, have given me their visuals and their information and their data and all that, and I've studied it very deeply. And he said, I am profoundly moved because they are right about these structures under the pyramid. And then from an engineering point of view, these structures are resonators in under the surface of the earth. Okay, well, you know where I'm going, Heather. That's the
Yeah.
second dimension. So I've been studying these structures underground because they represent the activation of the second dimension, which is an extremely important. It's amazing how this discovery by Chris and then his meeting with the Italian scientists, it's amazing how it ties all this together. Because right now we are under severe tectonic stress. Very credible geologists all over the world think that the crust is shifting
Mhm.
and the lower mantle is shifting. And in my case, I think it's also that the Earth is expanding, but that's just one idea that I have. But what Chris lectured about, apparently, is what he told me, is he explained how these structures under the pyramid resonated with the powers of the second dimension, and what they were doing. And by the way, you and I, in one of our other talks, I mentioned to you after the discovery in March. Yeah, I didn't know you'll recall this. I mentioned to you that I knew that those structures under there were real because whenever I get anywhere near the Giza Plateau, the energy shifts. And so what I said to you was I said, those are not only real, they are still somewhat functional. And those structures under the Great Pyramid explain what you and I feel in Egypt and the reason why the ceremonies and the work that the Egyptian Heliopolitan mystery teachers did in Egypt long ago. It's because they're resonating at the second dimensional level with the power under the pyramid. And so Chris Dunn cracked me up because he said, look, he said, I know you are really into that issue of them resonating with the tectonic realm, but he said, but what I'm interested in is, he said, I can tell from the science of those structures under the pyramid that they had to build those under there for two reasons. You had to stabilize the structure of the Giza Plateau. I mean, this is kind of like scientists who were playing around with atomic bombs.
Mm.
You don't play around with that energy. If you built something that could really resonate with the telluric realm, it could blow the planet unless everything was harmonic and balanced. And so it's all about the harmony of the higher dimensions and then the resonation with the telluric realm. And so speaking of tying all this together, I wrote Alchemy of Nine Dimensions in 2004, and the version that we have now that just came out last year is vastly improved because it's the third edition of it. But way back in 2004, I had a page in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, which is still there, with Chris Dunn's model of the pyramid as a power plant, and then my model for how humans need to resonate with the nine dimensions. So isn't this amazing how this is? You can imagine what this is. I can't believe it, really. But my son Chris is my illustrator, and Chris illustrated the whole thing. And then Dunn never basically said anything to me because I think he's an engineer, and he just went like, we don't need to go there. We're just going to stick with the facts, which I totally respect. But at this point, it's like the alchemy of nine-dimensional activation model is the same as the Great Pyramid on Giza Plateau with all the resonators underneath it. And then the last thing I'll add to it is that this is very important information because we are all dealing with huge levels of tectonic stress right now. We're dealing with earthquakes and we're dealing with volcanoes and we're dealing with, and all of us in our own way, even though I happen to live in a place that's pretty stable. A whole bunch of my relatives, including children, are living in places that really could explode, you know? And so that's a real issue for people. And so to understand that you need to allow yourself, your body, your mind, your consciousness, as the earth creates for us now, because the earth is really creating something, and then we'll eventually see what it all is. But as you resonate with all those tectonic powers, then what happens is you're more grounded in the third dimension, linear space and time. You can handle the emotional intensity of the fourth dimension. And then what happens is that higher spectrum of higher consciousness is available, you know? S-
This is extraordinary, Barbara.
Isn't
I
that
mean, it's
amazing?
like
I've
it's
been,
so confirming what you've been intuiting and tuning into for decades. But talk more about the meaning of the second dimension and why it is so critical that we're aware of it and connecting with it. Because as you and I have talked about before, people's tendency is to think that spiritual expansion is about elevating. And
Mm,
you talk so brilliantly about how we have to connect to the first
yeah,
dimension, crystal core of the earth, the second dimension, this area
right.
beneath the surface of the earth, to ground to be expanding into the other dimensions. So, talk more about
Right.
the meaning of that and how these earth changes right now are tied in with how the earth herself is in an ascension
Mhm.
process, a transformational process.
Great way to put it. Well, the first dimension is the iron core crystal in the center of the planet. And I always use this meditation tool. This is an icosahedron for the iron core crystal because it is an icosahedral structure in the center of our planet. And so the first dimensional iron core crystal resonates with every body in the universe, every other planet, every other star system, every galaxy, including 3I-Atlas. What happens is, this is important information. The first dimension, which is a dimension that a lot of people find difficult to get in touch with, that my workshops were aimed at opening people's ability to access the first dimension because it's tricky because it is resonating with the whole universe, right in the center of the planet. Therefore, it has all of the records of all time and experience in this universe, and it's the source of the Akashic records. And so, needless to say, traveling into the Akashic records is tricky stuff. But at this point, it's time
Mhm.
because that energy that is being created in the iron core crystal of the earth, which is resonating with all of the other bodies in the universe itself, that resonation moves into the second dimension, and the whole um, realm of the second dimension, which is between the iron core crystal and the surface of our planet, the crustal surface of our planet, that is the area of our planet that processes all the universal data and Akashic records in the universe itself. So it's a very, very, you know, it's not surprising that a lot of meditation systems just stayed out of it, especially Eastern meditation uh, things. But speaking of that issue, over the years as I've taught, lots and lots of Eastern teachers have come to me and we've done work together because they would say, like, we, speaking of their religion, we understand the higher dimensions, but we don't understand the lower dimensions. And so they would say, like, we're coming to you to have you help us understand and how to get in touch with this. And what I would always say to them is, I would always say, okay, we'll have a bargain. I'll teach you about the lower dimensions, and then you could teach me about the higher dimensions. Because the fifth through the ninth dimension are particularly subtle. And the Eastern religions, which are so ancient and from which we have so much data on this planet, the Eastern religions are very rich in their understanding of higher dimensional consciousness, you know. So therefore, here we are, and the second dimension is processing so much data about our awakening. What am I talking about? What is our place in the galaxy itself? Are the beings and intelligences throughout the galaxy going to be able to work with Earth and work with Earth's intelligence peacefully? We are you could almost say we're right in the middle of kind of a global peace accord
Mm.
that's opening up. And it was so interesting, by the way. I'm sure you took note of how the situation shifted in Israel and the Gaza war as soon as 3I-Atlas flew by Mars, right? So that's the first step in our global awakening and universal awakening to all of the knowledge that's in the universe. And the writer that I recommend the most on that particular topic, the person I found who has the most knowledge about our place in the galaxy and like how we communicate in the galaxy is David Wilcox in The Ascension Mysteries. It's a very, very, very good book. I just had to put that in there because I think that there's a lot of people who are watching a discussion like you and I are having at this moment and going like, well, how could I possibly figure that out? Well, David Wilcox has an unusually good skill at helping people who are like not super advanced and are learning at this point on some very, very complex topics. So that's why I like to bring him in, you know?
We'll come back to the second dimension because there's so much more I want to talk about with that. But say you brought up 3I Atlas.
Mhm.
So say a little bit more about what your sense of 3I Atlas is and how it's impacting us.
Well, you brought this one in exactly the right moment because I just had a flash of insight as soon as you asked the question. So that's always a great sign. And so let's go back to our model of the iron core crystal and all of that resonation with the whole universe itself. And let's let's see a visual, of our planet in space. And there's no question our consciousness started to change when we could finally see the Earth. And so if you can see the Earth and you can imagine the first dimension and the iron core crystal, and then if you can, and I do this a lot, start visualizing the lower mantle and the higher mantle and all of the magma and what do you call it? Stuff that comes out of volcanoes, all the,
Lava.
lava. Yeah, right. Yeah, not magma. Yeah, if you could visualize all of those amazing tunnels all the way throughout the second dimension where the lava can flow and can rise up and can explode into volcanoes and where the plates get greased by all of the hot lava and then they start to move and then pretty soon the volcanoes. Um, you you can get in touch with what 3I-Atlas is doing. As it's flying, and you did an interview a week ago or so about and discussed with the person you were talking with. I think it was Kolodny.
Kelly Kolodny.
Lodney, okay. And you discussed, and she channeled information about what will happen as it goes by Venus and gets close to the Earth and gets close to the sun. And we just had the Mars flyby. And I thought that was just brilliant on your part to question her in that regard. Because at this point, so many people now have a sensitivity about what Venus is, and what Mars is and what Jupiter is. And in my case, I learned astrology by doing astrodrama, where we had to act out the frequency of each one of the planets. And so now that this many people are sensitive to that issue, then we're all in a position to travel with 3I-Atlas.
Mm,
The
mm,
question
mm.
is, what is 3I-Atlas doing? I think with each one of those flybys, it's changing the archetypal potential of each one of the planetary fields. And it's going to do that to us.
Well, and here's what's so interesting, Barbara. When I attuned to 3I Atlas, I realized as it's going by these particular planets and the sun, it's activating our energy bodies and those chakras associated with those planets. And it feels to me like it's emanating these high frequency energies that are trying to support us in upgrading, clearing the out of balance patterns, coming into higher consciousness, and that it's activating that for the earth also.
So I figured out how to get in touch with it naturally. I mean, it's logical that that's where I would go. So about a week ago, before the Mars flyby, I was lying. I use a lot of liminal contact, like early morning or before I go to sleep at night. Most of us do that. And so I thought about 3I-Atlas and I picked up some visuals I'd seen of it. And then I realized, I've seen this before. And I realized that for years I've been watching my soul blasting all around the galaxy and all around the universe. And it looks like 3I-Atlas. It looks like a very bright, in this case, it even turned green for a while. My soul will sometimes turn blue. But if I really want to get in touch with what I'm really supposed to be doing, I get in touch with I visualize my soul and I tune to it for information. So I thought, well, okay, if it works with my soul, maybe it'll work with 3I-Atlas. Because it seems to be kind of the same. It seems to be this gigantic, universal soul just blasting all the way through the universe. That's why it's going so fast. It has so much distance to cover. So I found, and I'm doing this with each one of the flybys, I'll be doing this. I found by taking that liminal time and visualizing this courageous visitor that's going through our solar system, I realized that I can get information. And so that's how I got the information during the Mars flyby. Because I had that sensitivity to the issue of Mars, then with the flyby, I was able to pick up a lot more information. And if you want any of that information, it is hot stuff. Okay, many people listening to us, enjoying us, will be aware that there is a section of Mars called Cydonia and also called there's an Elysium Planitia section of Mars. Um, there's a bunch of structures there. And for those of us who have open minds and have studied the structures on Mars, the whole field of sacred site monuments on Mars is the same as a bunch of the sacred sites on planet Earth. For example, there is a circle in Cydonia that is exactly the same as Avebury Circle in England. There are planets on Mars, and this is really complicated data that I recommend people take an interest in. But what happened for me, because I was open to Mars to that degree, a whole new field of information came in about what happened to Mars and what happened to Earth. How come we have the same sacred site technology on Earth that exists on Mars, even though NASA tries to keep the public awareness away from that? There can only be one thing going on, and that's that the same culture
Mm.
built the sacred sites, and for example, Giza Plateau. And yet, one of those cultures, what happened to Mars? Now, this is my data because everybody says that the structures on Mars have to be millions of years old. That's what they say. Well, this is a bunch of baloney because Avebury Henge was built around 8 or 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, whatever. And we have a lot of dating on a lot of the sacred sites. And so I went, that's just a bunch of baloney. And it's always been obvious to me that a solar cataclysm occurred and that Earth survived it, but Mars did not. And what happened during this cataclysm, which is, according to my research in catastrophophobia. And Catastrophophobia is a book I wrote about cataclysms and how they affect human emotions. And it's now titled Awakening the Planetary Mind. So if anybody wants to get it, you got to watch out because publisher changed the title, which was not a good idea at all.
I know, I love the original title.
I know. So right. So back to this issue of Mars. It's obvious to me what happened is the Earth survived the cataclysm 11,000, 12,000 years ago that's so brilliantly described in Bibu Dev Mistra's um, latest book. You and I have talked about that too. So we have a Vedic scholar who has given us a really, really good description of what happened, how it happened, when it happened, etc. So it's obvious to me that Mars didn't what happened uh, according to astrophysics is Mars's atmosphere was stripped away.
Mm.
And so Mars has no atmosphere, and yet we have an atmosphere. Well, last thing I'll say about it, since I was an anti-war activist in during the Vietnam War, and I have fought against war on this planet my whole life. And so what I said to myself as I tuned in to 3I-Atlas passing by Mars was maybe Earthlings are going to be smart enough to wake up and realize what could happen to this planet at this point, because we can start to recognize what happened to Mars. So I think 3i Atlas has some kind of mega computer that's in the touch with the center of the universe that has the ability to learn from Mars the lessons that we need to learn on Earth.
That is extraordinary, Barbara. And it makes so much sense because that cataclysm on the Earth 12,000 years ago was triggered by comets. And there is evidence that comets were visible in the sky before that event occurred.
Mhm.
And I have felt that some of the meaning of 3I Atlas and these other comets that are coming into our solar system now is that they are celestial messengers
Mhm.
trying to alert us and support us in waking up and realizing this is such a critical choice point for us as humanity, and that we do have
Mhm.
this capacity to make this evolutionary leap into higher consciousness. But it's also, it feels to me like a warning signal to us that if we stay on a
Mhm.
path of destruction, much like
Mhm.
Atlantis 12,000 years
Mhm.
ago, then
Mhm.
we are calling on that cosmic reset to
Mhm.
occur again on the earth, because this is part of the precessional cycle, that this is that critical time in the precessional cycle when we go through earth changes and this kind of critical choice point.
Right. Yeah, and I find it so interesting that Sedna is at its basically at its perihelion right now. And I think that's why I'm just getting blasted because you know my transits and all that. And Sedna and Uranus are travel basically they're an early Gemini, and my Uranus is early Gemini. And so Sedna is another messenger, and it's a messenger from the feminine, you know, and so that's going to be a big part of the wake up call here is
Well, and Uranus and Sedna are now in the sky by the Pleiades, and
yeah.
you have a deep connection with the Pleiadians. But I also feel like 3I Atlas going by Venus is trying to activate those energies of the sacred feminine to support that and returning
Yes,
here
yeah,
on the earth to bring us back into balance.
I agree. And then I'll just have to put a little joke into things. One of the really frustrating things for me in this lifetime has been dealing with scientific materialism, and the quality of the earth sciences. And so nothing could be funnier that nothing, I can't imagine anything funnier than watching NASA try to cope with 3I Atlas, you know, and then NBC News. We finally got our first uh common media announce talk about 3I Atlas. Were you aware of that? 3 days ago, NBC News brought up the issue of 3I Atlas. And so they described a little bit about trajectory and all that kind of stuff. And then they said, meanwhile, people are actually talking about this as if it might be a spaceship or something like that. And so then they said in NBC News, they said, and this is just so typically ridiculous because NASA has made it very clear that this is a comet and this is not some kind of spaceship. And then I just started laughing because NASA is basically the one who has, made it clear that it's probably not a comet.
With
It,
all the research that's been done.
yeah,
And what do
and
you
so
make of the
scientific materialism has to go. We have, and it really does. We have to get beyond a situation on this planet where a scientist or somebody like Zahi Hawass or whoever who can have the power to not let the public know about the discoveries that are being made. We have to go beyond that.
well, and I know that you and I both watched Stephen Burns and his videos, and he's been so baffled by the fact that as 3I-Atlas made its pass by Mars, all of the instruments that NASA has there were thought to be able to finally get a closer glimpse of it, and we have nothing.
Yeah. I think he said something like their cameras were about as good as like trying to find a grain of sand in a box of kitty litter or something. He said something really funny. But what's interesting is I don't know whether you caught this one either. I've been just watching and accessing so much stuff because it's just like what's going on. And one of the scientific videos, I can't remember the name of it because there's 7 or 8 really good ones, um, talked about Stefan on the video. I was just so amazed. They showed his picture and they said that that we're including him. Did you see that? In a
No, but that's great because his research is phenomenal and he is
And
so.
they said young man, this young scientist research is so absolutely accurate and deep and complete that we will all watch him and we're including him in the discussion. And I went, wait, wow, I don't know. Maybe Stefan doesn't even know.
That is so great. Well, and you and I have been following him closely because he's so tuned into these earth changes that are happening. And he also talks about the way in which the earth is heating up given the lessening of our magnetic field and the amount of energy coming from the sun. And that's affecting the crust and the earth changes that we're experiencing. What's your sense of what all of this is about that we're dealing with these earth
This
changes?
is a really typical example of how things are becoming more clear, but a lot of people just don't register it. I said 10 or 15 years ago that the cause of global, because we are dealing with global warming. There's no question about that. But the fight is over what the cause is. And of course, then the scientific community got into selling carbon credits and creating a new way to make millions and billions off of the earth. And meanwhile, I just said 10 to 15 years ago, the cause of global warming is the heating up of the second dimension. And it's clear. I mean, but people are not making that leap yet. Like there are streets, one of the places on the planet that I watch very carefully is Campi Flegrei, which is the super volcano near Naples in Italy. And the reason I follow that so closely was I wrote a fictional trilogy from 2015 to 2021, trying to approach some of the stuff from a fiction. I thought it'd be good if I gave people a chance to enjoy characters. A lot of people love fiction because it's storytelling. And so in the trilogy, the central core tectonic issue was Campi Flegrei. And I got really deep into it because the more I learned about that volcano, a super volcano, um, the last time it exploded was in a full explosion was 39 to 41,000 years ago, and it caused the extinction of Neanderthal.
Wow.
Quite a few scientists now recognize that what happened with the Campiflagre super volcano was so destructive and caused such a nuclear winter all over the planet that Homo sapiens went forward, but gradually Neanderthal died out, you know. Um,
And it's such a confirmation, Barbara, of how these critical times in the processional cycle are times where, and this that was about three processional cycles ago, where
Right.
we go through, or one and a half, where we
One,
go through these huge times of earth changes, which, and do you see it as, in essence, the earth herself goes through a time of transformation and shift in her consciousness, and that we're being called to be in that ascension process with her.
yeah, we are. We don't have any choice if we come into a body and live on this planet. And then it, in my opinion, and this is coming from some scientific investigations I did, I do think the Earth is expanding. And I think for some reason, what happens is it expands at that half point of the precessional cycle. When we go into the age of Leo, it tends to expand, and now we're going into the age of Aquarius. And so the Earth, if you think about it, if you try to look at it from an extraterrestrial point of view, it's an extremely unusual place.
Mm,
It really isn't. I don't claim at this point to understand why the Earth needs to be as she is. She just is.
mm, mm. It's interesting. I wonder if part of that expansion is what Rory Duff talks about in terms of our going through the galactic sheet at this period of the precessional cycle every 12,000 years, and that it really is a time of increased activation of the Earth and of our entire solar system at
Mhm,
a time when our magnetic field lower lessens, so that
mhm,
the incoming solar rays and galactic energies really activate heating up the planet, but also increasing the energies and frequencies on the planet.
mhm,
And does it, do you see that? Because you talk about the eighth dimension and its relationship with solar and lunar energies and the consciousness coming through the sun. So, do you think part of what's happening is these eighth dimensional energies are really activating the second dimension and our consciousness here on the planet?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, in the illustrations for Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, I have two ways of showing how those nine dimensions work. One of them is with the person on a like a healing table in the third dimension, and then a triangle below, which is the second dimension, then the iron core crystal, which is the first. And then I show the higher dimensions as a fan over that person's body, and then the fifth through the ninth coming into it. But the other model I work with is the vertical axis, which is showing all nine dimensions like on a spiral. And the reason that's important is because the way they work is that on one side you got the even dimensions, second dimension, fourth dimension, sixth dimension, and eighth dimension. And then on the other side you've got the first dimension, third, fifth, seventh, and ninth. And it's by learning how to attune to that differential of the even dimensions and the odd dimensions. There's a lot of, I actually haven't really fleshed that one out because that's a really, really big topic. But when something goes on in the eighth dimension, the sixth dimension resonates with that, and we get the logos and we get geometry. Then it goes into the fourth dimension and into the polarity and the duality, and then it goes into the second dimension, which is the actual tectonic level. It's an amazing that model. And after I just want to say right now, I didn't invent that model. I channeled all of that from the Pleiades. I wrote a book in 1995 called, let's see, The Pleiadian Agenda. And all that information came through in the Pleiadian Agenda, and 50% of it or more went against conventional science. So then I knew that, and what was I to do about that? I'd made a firm vow that I would not change anything, and I would go ahead and give the information as it came in. And then over the next 20 to 25, 30 years, all the different parts that were in disagreement, according to conventional science, have actually shifted into agreement with the Pleiadian agenda. But I just want to be clear, I was just a channel for that model. And it's actually that model, actually, if you start to look at it closely, it's the same model as the Kabbalah and a lot of the spiritual traditions. But what's nice about it is it's really simple and direct. And you can anybody can get in touch with the information in Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. But regarding the discussion that you and I were just carrying on about the second, fourth, sixth, and eighth dimension, it's also incredibly rich and complicated.
This is just so mind-blowing to me, Barbara. And first of all, I want to reiterate again, and I'll put the links below. I mean, that book, your book is so helpful too, in terms of the meditations that you and Jerry have included to guide people on how to actually make connection to these different dimensional energies. But I hadn't ever really fully grasped this whole concept of what you're talking about now about the even dimensions and the odd dimensions. And we are going through this galactic sheet where we're getting more activation from the eighth dimension and the solar energies. We are learning so much more about sacred geometry, and so much is coming into our awareness with Ibrahim Karim's work around sacred geometry and ancient temple science, and so much,
Yeah.
authors who are writing about this. And then we're dealing with how that's activating the fourth and the second dimensions. But the fourth dimension is the dimension of our collective consciousness.
Hard one.
And that's where we're in so much turmoil right now.
Yes.
So
And we always will be, because it's the nature of the fourth dimension. In order to reach the higher realms, the individual meditator, individual person has to resolve duality and polarity within themselves. And so, of course, the book hit chapter 4, and the chapters are based on the dimensions. And chapter 4 really gives a lot of information about how to do that. And we're all in the middle of a collective awakening right now. And now we can see, as a result of 3I-Atlas and the activation of the tectonic realm, I think what's really freaking people out, and it should be, there is no way out of this except to just open it all up. All of the holding back over centuries and millennia has to go now because this planet is really, really opening. And I don't understand that, Heather. That's such a mystery that Gaia creates that way, but she does.
well, and I think what you're describing too is that we have to fully open to these energies from the earth and the cosmos and be in this liminal time.
Mhm.
Honor being in the mystery, because we have exited the Kali Yuga. We can't go back to these patterns of the past and our modern understanding of history. All of that is dissolving.
Mhm.
So we're needing to not get caught in fear or the chaos of the transition, but trust the unfolding.
Yeah. So the question is, how do you do that? Well, it's a learning process. And I got really lucky. About 25 years ago, I was teaching with my Mayan teacher, Hunbat's men. We were teaching at Berkeley in an old brick warehouse, and we had about 100 people sitting around on the floor and all that. And a 7.2 earthquake struck right underneath. It closed down the Bay Bridge. It did all, or the
Remember that.
yeah, the what do you call it? The beautiful bridge, that really nice one. At any rate,
Golden Gate.
there I was. I was sitting in a chair, and then there was a table and a lamp between Hunbat's and me, and then Hunbat's was over on the other side. So I looked over at Hunbat's, and Hunbat's was sitting there in a state of utter peace and bliss, as if the most wonderful harmonic that ever could have occurred was occurring. And by the way, fortunately, it didn't last long. It was a short, as Stefan Burns says, boom shakalaka. I did my own boom shakalaka. I looked over at Hoonbats and then I looked at the students and I realized like he's completely in bliss. He's not going to be worrying whether bricks are going to fall on people or anything. So I stood up and raised my hands as high as I could and said, "Fire your Kundalini." And because I did that, my Kundalini blew, which is not, I'm used to that. I've been open that way for since I was like 5 years old. And so what I realized from that is that when there's an incredible thunderstorm or a wonderful activation of some type, just let that Kundalini run because what's happening is then you're in resonant harmonic with the the fire of the planet itself. And I noticed that about Vibhu Dev Misra, that he's a very peaceful being, even though he's dealing with some really amazing forces. The forces actually give you energy and peace. And I think people are going to need, and then also I wrote a book called the Mind Chronicles Trilogy because I did 100 past life regressions under hypnosis in order to explore my past lives, and then I wrote a book about it. And what I discovered by exploring all those past lives with different therapists, I work with 3 therapists, what I discovered is when a really bad thing is happening, like a big flood or a great big earthquake or volcano or whatever, you go right out of your body. The people who are watching the people experiencing are the ones who are freaked out. And so what you got to realize is if you're going to end up in, confiflagre when it blows, you're just going to go right out of your body. And so there's nothing to fear.
Well,
Nothing.
as you said before we got on the recording, when we remember that we're soul selves, we're a part of infinity,
Hmm.
and there's nothing to fear.
Hmm.
But also, I think part of what you're talking about, Barbara, that's so profound is that we are in this process, this transformational alchemical process
Hmm.
of death of old ways of being into a new birth. The earth herself is
Hmm.
birthing herself in new ways. And like being in the birth canal, we have to trust the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And that's what I experience with you, what I experience when I talk to Bibhu. He trusts what's unfolding. And and re- and we need to release that part of us, the
Hmm.
ego consciousness that wants to have a sense of control, certainty, know exactly what's happening and when it's going to happen. This
Yeah.
is really calling us into reconnecting at a deep, conscious, spiritual level with the earth herself and
Hmm.
the cosmos to know we're part of that oneness.
Yeah. And the oneness is really starting to build now because as this tectonic awakening happens, everybody is feeling that. Stefan, for instance, does such a good job with helping people stay grounded. And like with solar flares, I can't handle them at all. I just have to go to bed. They're so intense for me. And that's okay. Go to bed, you know? And so by experiencing all of this as a global experience on this planet, it's bringing us into oneness. I really think that's happening.
It's so beautifully said. And I also feel like I mean, you have such deep shamanic roots and that understanding that everything is conscious and
Yeah.
everything is interconnected. So I feel like it is bringing us back into relationship with all that is.
Mhm.
Part of what I try to do in dealing with the solar flares is be in a practice every day of communing with the sun, honoring the sun, so that when I'm bombarded by those energies, I'm in relationship with the sun. And I know you're so deeply in relationship with the
Mhm.
earth and sky and all these dimensions. It's trusting
Mhm.
those energies.
And that's been a great gift from Stefan to get us so get in touch with the flares and with the various functions of the sun itself. It's wonderful.
Well, and it does feel to me like the Earth herself and these energies from the sun and 3I-Atlas and all of these configurations that are happening are trying to support us and guide us through this
Yeah.
transition time.
Yeah. Yeah, and on my what this is the last thing I'd like to say on my website, I'm doing seasonal analysis, as you know, spring equinox, summer solstice, fall equinox, and winter solstice. And I started with the spring equinox in 2023 because I had a psychic insight that this process that we're in the middle of right now would complete itself by the end of 2027. So that those reports on my website, I've been going season by season. I have never looked at the astrology in 2027, except just kind of, I have to look at some of it. But what I did not want to do is I did not want to try to figure out what was going on. I wanted to cover it as an experience through 4 to 5 years, because I think this is the ascension of our planet.
Mm, that is so powerful. The other thing before we run out of time that I want to touch on that you talk a lot about in Catastrophobia or Awakening Planetary Mind, you talk about the importance of our not getting caught in our cellular memories
Mhm,
of these cataclysms in the past,
Yeah,
to heal that collective PTSD so
yeah,
that we don't get caught in fear, but
yeah.
do trust and honor what's unfolding. And then we can be in that ascension process.
hmm hmm Yeah. And I somehow I agree with you, and I knew that I needed to not try to go ahead and figure if and get to it, if you know what I mean. I knew that I needed to just be in it, like being in cosmic soup, season by season, to observe the way the opening was unfolding.
So this is like, it sounds like you're seeing this now through 20 until 2027 as kind of the chrysalis time.
Yeah, the last reading I'll do is the winter solstice 2027. Yeah. And then it'll probably be published as a book because it's just amazing. Like the fall equinox reading, which is posted on handclow2012.com, is all about 3I-Atlas because that's what's going on this fall. But I couldn't in 2023 when I decided to do this process, I couldn't have known that 3I-Atlas was going to come bopping in to the solar system.
Well, it's so such a confirmation of what you attune to and what is coming, this wisdom coming to you, and then how it actually unfolds.
Yeah. And it's so exciting. I mean,
Well,
when discoveries came forth in March, I was just like, that's when I got really excited. I went, now we're going to go for it.
well, thank you so much, Barbara, for sharing your wisdom with us and for your attunement to these energies and how you're supporting us in trusting what's unfolding, trusting our relationship with the earth and sky, and allowing ourselves to be in this alchemical journey of transformation.
Yeah. And thank you, Heather, for just being so deep in your profound understanding of mythology. I've just learned so much from you. It's just a joy.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you again to this community for being a part of this conscious journey that we're in as humanity into a new
Mm,
world.
mm,
Blessings and love to all of you.
yeah.